Let's jump into 21 through 30. 21, this kicks off here with Josh Jacobs, who we've talked a lot about on our last couple of shows. 22, Jalen Hurts leads the quarterbacks here, Barry. I'm assuming, yeah, and you have them stacked. It goes Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, but Hurts last year's ride or die. Is he the greatest ride or die of all time? People are wondering. But also the fact that the rushing really, really helps him in this category too.
I think it's the greatest ride or die of all time for this reason and this reason only. Like, 'cause I've had some massive hits. Kareem Hunt's rookie year was a massive hit. Josh Jacobs' rookie year was a massive hit. Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, when he was going late second round, and everyone was just like, well, Austin Eckler's just a pass catcher. He's a glorified third down back. He's not going to score touchdowns. And I'm like, guys, they're going to use it's Lombardi. They're going to use him the way they use Alvin Kamara. Like, he can score touchdowns. Like, you know, and he ended up finishing as, I think, the number one running back or the second best running back in fantasy that year. So that was a massive win as well, just because the narrative was so strong that he wouldn't score touchdowns. And then the year he was my ride or die, he scored 18 touchdowns. But I'm going to say Jalen Hurts is my greatest one, and because for two reasons. Number one is that the bar to clear was so high. Again, like, it wasn't like, it's not that he was an unknown quantity. That's the other thing is I get people like, oh, everyone knew who he was. Yeah. The idea of ride or die isn't like, hey, here's this obscure guy.
Right. It's not a sleeper.
It's not a sleeper. It is, this is a player who is known, that I believe in so strongly that I'm planting this huge flag. This is the guy that I will not waver from, that I am riding or dying with him, and I think he takes a big step up. I have him higher than consensus. I believe in this guy above all others. So that's what it is. It's planting my flag on somebody in a big, massive way. So for Jalen Hurts, like, he had to beat Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, all these guys that were and Kyler Murray, all these guys that were being drafted ahead of him. He had to jump. He was going as quarterback 8. So number one, there was just from a football standpoint, just a massive gap that he had to make up. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, to be my ride or die and be successful, doesn't mean you have to finish as number one. But what I said on air was, as I said, so many questions out of Philadelphia were, can this guy be a franchise quarterback? They were like, Eagles fans were pissed that the Eagles didn't draft a quarterback when they had a sixth round, the sixth overall pick, and then they traded back with Miami, and they had a top 12 pick overall. But they were pissed that they didn't take at least a quarterback. And Howie Roseman was like, no, we're going with Jalen Hurts, and people were like, his accuracy, blah blah blah, he's just a runner, that kind of stuff. And I went on national TV and I said, guys, I believe he is a franchise quarterback. I believe he can make a third-year Josh Allen-like leap, like the way that Josh Allen made in the third year. I think number one quarterback in fantasy is well within the range of outcomes here for Jalen Hurts, and I gave a bunch of reasons why. And two things happened. Number one is that he wound up as the number one quarterback in fantasy on a points per game basis. That worked out. And then secondly, by the way, he was also he became a franchise quarterback. He came within, he led them to a Super Bowl. Came very close to winning that Super Bowl. He played awesome in the Super Bowl. The fumble was bad, but other than that, he had a phenomenal, he's not the reason they lost that Super Bowl. He had a phenomenal Super Bowl. He became a franchise quarterback. He became, at least for a minute there, the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. It wasn't just fantasy. He became the face of a franchise, one of the faces of the league. And so, that just massively worked out. And then I'll just also talk personally. It's the very first thing I ever did for NBC Sports. I'd been at ESPN for 15 years. And now I'm coming, for the first time in my life, I'm not only at a new company, but I'm also part of NFL coverage, right? At ESPN, it was always the fantasy guy was over here. NFL coverage, we're doing Monday Night Countdown and NFL Live and blah, blah, blah. And then I was over here in my little fantasy world, doing my fantasy shows and stuff like that on ESPN. It was separation of church and state. But at NBC, and it was one of the big reasons I came to NBC, is NBC's like, no, we want you to be part of our NFL coverage. How we cover the league is going to include fantasy and sports betting. And so this is my first time, right? And so I'm out there, and literally the Hall of Fame game was my first day that I'd ever met a lot of these people. It's the first day I've ever met Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy. It's the first time I've met Maria Taylor. It's the first time I've met, should be in the Hall of Fame, Rodney Harrison. Right? I mean, I wasn't on air with him, but I met Chris Collinsworth there, back at the hotel.
Right.
And so it's big for me. And I'd met Jason Garrett once before, but now I'm on a stage with him, on TV with Jason Garrett, right? And so all these great football minds, and I'm the fantasy guy coming in, and the very first thing I say, and Chris Sims, who knows quarterbacks backwards and forwards, I'm doing the segment with Chris Sims, right? Son of Phil, fantasy, football royalty, NFL royalty, and I'm doing the segment with Sims, and Sims has been public about this, that he didn't, from the tape work that he does, and Chris, Chris puts in the work. I got to tell everyone. Chris absolutely puts in the work. And so Chris is telling me, he's like, I'm hearing from guys, they don't like how he goes through his progressions. I don't know that I see it there. And I'm going on national TV. First thing I do, first day, I'm saying, guys,
this is the guy.
This is the guy. I think he can be Josh Allen this year. And I was like, okay, dude. So the fact that it worked out was just massive for me personally, internally. I think it helped me a lot internally here at NBC Sports, and with my colleagues who, have forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. And so, that's a long rant, but yeah, Jalen Hurts will always, always, always have a very special place in my heart.
Jalen Hurts.
If I could have made him my ride or die again this year, I would have.
You know what? In your heart, he's still always a ride or die.
Well, yes.
But
I'm
Amon-Ra
still
St. Brown
him.
season.
But by the way, Jalen Hurts is my number one quarterback this year.
Sure.
Right?
Over.
And we're going to go right here and lead us to it, right?
Over Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. And we'll start right there with Josh Allen, who we heard this last summer. The Bills would like him to maybe run a little less often. Yes, They took James Cook that offseason with the second-round pick. Yes, they've added a guy like Damian Harris. They do have depth at the running back position. What makes Allen so valuable, obviously, he's a great thrower, but the running threat that he has been in fantasy, is it sustainable, you think, this year? You don't have that fear of it dropping off a little bit?
What was the Cam Newton quote? You can't tell the lion not to roar.
That's
is that
right.
what it was?
I think it is, yeah.
That's what it is with Josh Allen. They can say all they want.
It's in his blood.
When Josh Allen is a baller, Josh Allen is just a plain, simple baller. And when he's out there and he sees an opening and he's going to try to make a play, he's going to make a play. He's not going to be like, oh, you know what? I see an
Coach
opening
told
there.
me not to run
I
anymore.
see an opening in the A gap, but they've told me not to run it. So, you know what I mean? He's just going to now, do they maybe call less designed plays? I think so. Do I think they try to get him some help, right? So they added Dalton Kincaid out of the draft, I think will be helpful. I think, Gabe Davis, a healthy Gabe Davis, again, we talked about this, he had a high ankle sprain that wasn't reported. We knew there was something about his foot. We knew it was but it wasn't reported as a high ankle sprain. And that was something that came out this offseason at the Combine, where both Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane both said, because I asked both of them directly about Gabe Davis. They both said, well, he was dealing with a high ankle sprain.
Everyone was
like,
whoa,
whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. A high ankle sprain, because that's different than what you guys said during the season. And that, I think, significantly changes how you perceive his year last year. Obviously, they have Stephon Diggs. You mentioned James Cook. They have a couple of guys in Damian Harris and Latavius Murray who have proven to be pretty effective at the goal line. So, yeah, maybe. Could he lose 2 rushing touchdowns this year? Yeah, possibly. Slightly less yardage, but he's number 2. I think he's a baller. He's had at least 6 rushing touchdowns in every single year he's played in the NFL. I see no reason why that won't continue. And I think the important thing is, if we can flash my rankings back up there for people that are watching the show. I know people are hearing it on air, but if you're just listening to this, I have Jalen Hurts at 22 overall, Josh Allen at 23 overall, Patrick Mahomes at 24 overall. You see it there on your screen, all in a row. And the way I do my rankings, Connor, is that's my way of saying, look, I have to put somebody in order. So, yes, all things considered, if I'm sitting there and I want a quarterback, I have Hurts, then Allen, then Mahomes. But by putting them all next to each other, it's my way of saying, I think it's razor thin.
They're in a tier.
They're in a tier, and, if you get to that point and you're like, I kind of like Mahomes a little bit better, you ain't losing because you have Patrick Mahomes on your team. He's going to be awesome this year, as is Josh Allen, as is Jalen Hurts. So that's why I have them all there. With Mahomes, he runs less, obviously, than Hurts or Allen. Again, new wide receivers. They're leaning a lot on Kadarius Toney. Can he stay healthy? Sky Moore's a young player. MVS is sort of inconsistent. Yes, they have Kelsey, but wrong. So just, again, at this level, you have to nitpick. You have to really nitpick. And so I just feel there's less picks to nit with Jalen Hurts than there are with Allen or Mahomes. But again, they're all right there. They're all superstars. They're my first 3 quarterbacks off the board. They're all going to have monster years.
That brings us to 25, which is Mark Andrews. All offseason, Barry, we have talked about the hiring of Todd Monken to orchestrate this offense, going from Greg Roman's run-heavy design to Todd Monken's very famous for saying, I like big plays, I like explosive plays a few years ago. Now Mark Andrews into the fold with that, a happy and paid Lamar Jackson. It feels like as long as he's healthy, Mark Andrews can be the force at the tight end position that he's been.
And I think the important thing is that I think people are disappointed by Mark Andrews last year, but I think, I don't think they appreciate how much Tyler Huntley affected Mark Andrews last year and that entire offense where they had to scale it back and they had to go even more run heavy. In the 10 games that Mark Andrews played last year with Lamar Jackson, a 28% target share, over 60 receiving yards a game, he averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game. Compare that with Huntley, where he averaged just 9.1 fantasy points per game. We expect this offense to explode under Monken. We expect there to be in scoring position quite often. Mark Andrews, friend of the podcast, Mark Andrews, by the way, we interviewed him last year. He's still going to be their best red zone threat. And now the addition of Odell Beckham Jr., the drafting of Zay Flowers, having Rashad Bateman back, suddenly it's pick your poison. I think this passing offense still goes through Mark Andrews. I think he's still a big red zone and end zone target. It's worth noting that he was tied for the second most end zone targets among all tight ends. Last year, he was fourth in red zone targets. Again, they get in close. The Ravens look for Mark Andrews, and I think that will continue to be the case. But the fact of the matter is because you've got Beckham, because you've got Zay Flowers, because you've got the Lamar Jackson who's always a threat to tuck it and run it, it's just pick your poison. And so there may be slightly less targets for Andrews, but again, I think they'll be more efficient. I think they'll play at a higher pace of play. I think they'll be in scoring position often. They're going to throw a lot more. I think Mark Andrews is the clear-cut number 2 tight end. And if you sat here and said, Matthew, give me a tight end that finishes if I told you Travis Kelce is not the number 1 tight end in fantasy this year, who is it? Mark Andrews is the guy.
26, an interesting one here in Chris Olave, Saints wide receiver, who had, honestly, on paper, at least a case to be the offensive rookie of the year last year. You're a little higher on Chris Olave here, Barry. Olave's ADP right now, 32.3. You have him 26th overall. Obviously, all the news is that Michael Thomas is healthy. We'll see how long that lasts. But you are very high on Olave and his new quarterback connection now, Derek Carr, in the fold.
Week 2 on. Again, they're just sort of they had Andy Dalton there, and the Saints offense last year was a bit of a mess. But from week 2 on, Chris Olave had a 28% target share, which is top 10 among all wide receivers. They looked for him early and often. In games last year, he had 11 games last year where he had 6 or more targets. In those games, he averaged over 15 fantasy points per game. And I think an underrated aspect of Derek Carr being the new quarterback in New Orleans is this. Last 2 seasons, Derek Carr, top 5 in the NFL in both deep ball rate and deep completions. He likes to chuck it deep, which, by the way, that's what Chris Olave does.
It's the name of his game.
Right? Go down and get it.
He's the air yards king.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I think Olave has a monster year. I think Derek Carr is an above-average NFL quarterback, but I think for Chris Olave, he's a perfect quarterback, especially as we talked about. Alvin Kamara is missing 3 games. We'll see how healthy he is. Yeah, sure, fine. Michael Thomas is healthy now. Okay, we'll see how long that lasts, but whatever. This passing offense is going to go through Chris Olave. I think he's going to get, a 28% target share. I see nothing in what we have this year that makes me think that's going down. If anything, I think that goes up. I think Derek Carr will lock onto Chris Olave the way he locked onto Devontae Adams last year. And so, I had a short list of people that were my fantasy ride or die, and Chris Olave was on that list.
The top 30 rounds out with T. Higgins at 27, Devontae Smith at 28, 29 is Ramondre Stevenson, and 30, Joe Mixon from the Bengals. So there you have it, Barry.
I'll say this. If the Patriots don't sign another running back, and I really think they will, I think it'll be Zeke or Fournette. They've kicked the tires on both those guys. They definitely want another veteran in there from everything I've heard. Once they sign him, I think you could see me flipping Mixon. I love Ramondre Stevenson. But I think you could see me flipping Mixon and Stevenson. But I will say this. If for some reason they don't, if the Patriots go into the season saying we're good with, Pierre Strong and J.J. Taylor and, whatever, Ramondre Stevenson goes way up. He's ranked where he is because I'm assuming there'll be another guy signed, and then we're just waiting to see sort of who it is. But if not, Stevenson, I think, is just a really talented running back. So I think he'll go high up. And I think some people might be surprised to see Devontae Smith that high. But real quickly, go to my 100 Facts column, which is free, NBCSports.com, rotoworld.com on Company Man. But you'll see there, in my 100 Facts column, the 100 facts you need to know before you draft, I lay out, like, the numbers for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith after, like, a certain period of time, like I think it was a couple weeks in, and you look at them, the numbers are, like, identical. Like, Devontae Smith had a bad week 1. And then from like week 2 on, like they were more or less the same guy. A.J. Brown has more touchdown equity, obviously, but people are sleeping on Devontae Smith.
Do you think if he looked as physically imposing as A.J. Brown, they'd be viewed exactly the same? That's my theory.
That's the problem. Yeah,
he's a Slim Reaper.
He doesn't look like.
But when you look at the numbers, like you said, especially after that week 1, not that different. So.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBC Sports and rotoworld.com. Just want to thank you so much for watching what you just watched, or at least being too lazy to click out of it after the autoplay just kept it going. So either way, thank you so much for just letting it scroll by your screen. And now I'd like to ask you respectfully, please subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel for the latest NFL news, fantasy headlines from RotoWorld, and betting analysis from NBC Sports Edge.